Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography in Akron, Ohio. This podcast was recorded as an ongoing documentation practice with NCCAkron visiting artists in 2024 and 2025. In this episode, NCCAkron's Executive Artistic Director, Christy Bolingbroke, enters the studio with Brooklyn, New York-based Reggie Wilson. Executive Artistic Director, Choreographer, and Performer with Fist and Heel Performance Group. Wilson's work draws from the cultures of Africans in the Americas and is combined with postmodern elements to create what he calls post-African Neo-HooDoo Modern dances. Wilson has lectured, taught, conducted community workshops, and has been presented nationally and internationally. He is the recipient of awards including the Doris Performing Artist Award and the Joyce Foundation Award.
How or when did you know you wanted to be a choreographer?
Oh.
Can you remember a time when you weren't a choreographer?
I don't remember a time. I officially, if I can call it that, I officially became a choreographer in recorded print history when I was in the 8th grade. That would be the first evidence of it when I was in middle school. Being a choreographer since that time has really been a strong part of my identity. It's how I feel like it's how I navigate the world. It's how I identify. It's how I manipulate, integrate, rotate. I'm trying to think of like what it's a 3 or 4 or 5 dimensional kind of part of how I think of myself and how I navigate reality.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so much inside of that. I often like to say it's all choreography, right? Work, life, art, how you talked about how you navigate the world, whether that's making sense of a moment, whether it's also taking time to reflect and how you organize information.
I would say I don't think it's everything I do. I would differentiate because sometimes I get like hyper specific about what it means to choreograph and the responsibilities connected to. So for me, I really do specifically think of choreographing as organizing bodies in space, in time, in action and movement, and often for viewership. And so when I say I identify who it is, it's everything is being processed in order to get to that end, as opposed to everything that I do is choreography.
What particularly inspires you, or what do you look that sort of drops in that you're like, this needs to be a dance. This needs some bodies to be organized around it and to be viewed by people.
I feel like I've said this and I've been criticized by folks that work with me, folks that love and or hate me. I hold to it, and I don't believe I work from inspiration or waiting for inspiration. So I feel like there's a lot of craft responsibility I try to take ownership for in making decisions. I feel like there's a lot of decision making in choreographing, whether they happen instantaneously during performance or whether they happen over a much longer kind of time frame. Where it usually comes, a dance or a subject for a dance usually comes up is my attention continues to be drawn towards something. Like I have an obsession about something. And when that attention or obsession, reoccurs, I kind of want it to just stop like intruding, and I feel like I need to give it an appropriate amount of attention to sort itself out, to organize itself. And the best set of tools that I have to organize that, to research that, to think about that are what I have come to know as choreographic tool, whether that's, it could be a color, it could be a pattern, it could be a dance somewhere on the planet, it could be a book, it could be a historical figure or an individual friend or relationship or dynamic. And if my attention keeps coming to it, I want it to be less random, I guess, or intrusive and disruptive to me in my life. And I feel like I owe it to listen to it and to play with it and to research it and to bring everybody around me into the idea.
I mean, that's another kind of organizing when you're like, this thing keeps coming my way. And so then to sort of make space for it and organize resources, people, and to be able to welcome it so that you can exorcise it, if that's such a thing.
When I was working on this piece called Moses's, we started doing research on something called ZAR, Z-A-R, which is a kind of widespread ritual practice, spirit practice. And some folks that wrote about it in the past, in the 19th century and the 18th century, or, folks that outside of the practice kind of observing or thinking about it in these other cultures and stuff, they're just like, oh, it's an exorcism. And what they came to find out once they actually talked to the people, they were just like, no, you don't exorcise the spirit, you actually marry the spirit. So if you feel like you're being possessed by a spirit that seems to be disruptive to everybody around you, you don't get rid of the spirit, you actually call the spirit in, get familiar with it, and what they would call marry the spirit. And it becomes part of your personality, or it becomes like another part of who you are and a way to kind of relate to the universe. And then I don't know if I'd been thinking about myself as a choreographer or my choreographic kind of way that I organize and move through the world. So it's not about getting rid of the idea, it's about integrating the idea in an intentional, conscious way.
I mean, the sense of practice, of embodiment, absorption comes to mind as how you describe it. There's something I want to go back to, though, because you talked about a series of decisions to be made with choreography. How do you name a dance? This seems to be like a whole other creative exploration for some people. And since it seems that you are less deadline driven and more the performances, the deadlines are sort of interruptions of the process, I'm curious how and when you know what to call it.
It's a crapshoot. Sometimes it arrives. Sometimes the obsession or the thing is so tied to wording and linguistics that it's just there. It's obvious and I don't have to struggle. And then when I call it the thing, there's no issue about folks when they come to see the work having to struggle with the title to get to understand the piece. It's just like, no, it's there. It's fine. It's one and the same. Other times it's out of convenience and I'll go through multiple titles because this grant is due or that somebody wants something. And then sometimes you're kind of stuck with the title. I was just thinking, I've never made a dance about my relationship to words. And I feel like I have such an antagonistic, or have had such an antagonistic relationship with what I used to call words, but then I came to start calling it the written word. And then what I came to articulate it as the power that the written word has over the dance or the kinesthetic in the West and so many of the cultures that we live in at this current time. It's always a struggle with, like, if I say that word, will that, like, can I give the person reading the program something that helps them in the process of experiencing the piece, as opposed to defining, determining, restricting the experience of the piece. Sometimes it's verbal, right? Sometimes you just need to be able to convince
Mm-hmm.
a presenter or an ally, as the young folks would say,
Yeah.
when you're trying to convince somebody to get on board with the project. But sometimes it's also when you're just trying to get it to the performers that you want to collaborate with, or the other collaborators, when you're thinking about lights, when you're thinking about costumes, when you're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
set pieces or no set, do you know, at the stage. And you like, how can you come up with another way to language the piece? Or when you come up with a title, is it something that those other collaborators can also go off on their own jaunts and
Mm-hmm.
directions that actually feed the process, as opposed to distract or dismantle
Enough of a
your
portal or
process?
prompt to invite you
Yes.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And as much as I've struggled with my relationship to the written word, I've never landed on using a dance piece to do that.
To
And I think I'm rolling that around in my head now, and I really don't like it. But
so it
that doesn't mean anything, because that's often part of the struggle.
you may
I've written about it. I've lectured about it. I've made PowerPoints about it. I use it in my teaching. I use it in the studio with the performers. I just feel like the struggle of it, that somehow it's so easy for the word, whether it's written or verbal, to get precedent over the moving, kinesthetic doing. I've avoided that.
I'm prompted to then go on a small tangent and ask, maybe you've covered this before in other interviews, but where does the term fist and heel performance group come from as a sort of umbrella for all of your work?
Fist and Heel Performance Group, I first encountered it in a book by a professor, Hel Sobel, I think that's how it's pronounced, was writing about the ring shout, the kind of ritualized practice that enslaved Africans resorted to, used in development of a type of religious practice in, I'll call it North America, but like a lot of the elements of it. And it was a derogatory term.
Mm-hmm.
So fist and heel worship, they thought that they were talking, it was a way of degrading these folks of not worshiping in an appropriate Christian manner. They were worshiping with their fists and stomping with their heels. So they were clapping and shouting, basically what we would understand as shouting, and what is the arguable kind of beginning of the Black church. And so it has call and response, it has ecstatic moments, it has rules and regulations, it moves in a counterclockwise kind of circle, it's rhythmical.
I love
So
that.
that's where I got it from, was from that book, talking about Afro-Baptist practices during the slaving period and post slaving period.
And just to hear more of it, because given the longevity of your career and the work that you've done, that is fits within that world that you've named, but also is not limited by it.
That's why I really liked it. When I first came across it, I was just like, "Oh, I like it." I'm like doing this research. This is back in the early 90s when I first came across it, and I was just like, "Oh," and a ring shout, and the research I was doing down south where my family is from, and in Milwaukee where my family is from, and it was starting to go down to the Caribbean, to Trinidad and Tobago. I was like, "Oh, this is exciting. This fits." And then I was like, but if I move away from this dance thing, it also sounds like a little bit more political, but it's also kind of, it's anatomical, so it could be theatrical without necessarily being dance, and it's kind of theater. It could be musical, it could be performative, or it could be something else. Talking about that relationship to titles, I started, quote unquote, started the company before I found the name for the company. And then it was just like, I thought it would be cool to be a group as opposed to being a dance company.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
But there were a number of folks who had groups at the time. I think Mark Morris had started. They were a group, and I think David Gordon, they were a group. I feel like there were a couple.
They were the pickup performance group. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this idea of, I don't want to say a collective, but a group of individuals coming together to investigate and make something performative,
Mm-hmm.
I thought was interesting. And I thought that would definitely last, whether what I was doing was more dance or less dance.
You talked about the importance of a title that could be a prompt to your performers and collaborators. What do you look for in, and especially dancers as well as collaborators?
The more I learn about Central African and Kikongo kind of culture, like the importance of containers and being able to hold something and being able to hold a liquid or fluid or water, and that the shape of the water can change or fits itself to the shape of the container. So I feel like there's something in that. For performers, what I've learned to look for or require or cover my ass is having folks that are interested in the work.
Not just a job.
Whatever, depending on the context of the place, not just for whatever, some other reason, but they want to be there because they're interested in the work. And not to say that it's not a job, right? But so that, and folks that are attracted to the work. I think that's what I mean by that. I feel like if I make a checklist, it tends to be that they have had some, I don't like calling it formal training, but like having some kind of focused, articulated, I'm using finger quotes, training, experience, discipline over a period of time so that they have some sensibility about what it is they're doing. And that tends to be with some type of ballet training, some type of what we'll call modern dance training. Folks will call those things kind of technique. But I also find it's also super important for folks in the company or that tend to want to work with me. They also have a consciousness around their folk, traditional, or kind of pop dancing. Not necessarily all three. And in different places, those things mean different things. But they need that. They need, just because of the content that I tend to stick together, because I often use found material that jumps from one idea to another idea. And they have to be a little bit of a smarty pants in multiple different ways. So like a kinesthetic smarty pants, as well as questioning and being able to respect other people and other bodies while we're working. And so finding folks that can be with each other and work with each other and tolerate each other and help each other and share with each other, I feel like that's as important as the first stuff that I listed.
I mean, hearing you think and talk about that out loud, for anyone who hasn't been able to see your work, I might be reminded like that training in air quotes that you talk about translates into a really strong sense of self-awareness of how one moves, biomechanical, kinesthetic intelligence, so that they actually can do less, if that makes sense. There's such a distillation to not overperform, to do the thing. And that actually reminds me, I was such a treat to get to see you work with the UA students this past fall. And I loved the question that you asked them after a run through. And you asked every single performer, how was that for you? And if they said good, bad, or the same, you ask them to qualify it too, like good, like it was the same as yesterday, or considering that you feel like crap today, it was pretty good. And it's something that has stuck with me because of the importance of language, because of what it can mean. And so I'd love to dig in a little deeper and ask you to describe or define virtuosity in dance. Given the rigor and practice that you've developed over decades now, how do you describe virtuosity in dance?
I don't think I would ever use that word for my dance. However, I think I definitely do believe in it. Thinking about it like in terms of generally speaking, and then like in terms of my work. In terms of my work, I need you to be able to move through like a ridiculous number of vocabularies. And we kind of do that by grounding ourselves in what we call our pelvis and the directionality. And so there's ways that we kind of work with that in the studio. But for me, virtuosity would just be being able to, I want to say control. Like I feel like I'd have to fight with this word a little bit more. Having a deep, gigantic control, sense of discipline, and being able to articulate specificity with the body. And the qualifier I would put on it would also be like, I don't want to say repetitively, but I'm having a hard time separating in general to what I would take when I think somebody is virtuosic in my work. But I feel like it's being able to have control over articulation. I think that's it. And I think there's a lot of different manners of that. And for my work, I think being able to be virtuosic in a number of different languages and vocabularies and intentionalities and meld them together in one body in a limited amount of time.
What I'm struck by as someone who entered the workforce right at the turn of this century, it was what I felt as a dancer, that perhaps in the 20th century, you specialized in a single form, a single technique, studying and working under one choreographer. And in the 21st century, we know it's more prevalent. I think at least 80% of the field, if not more, who are working on a project basis, which means that they're working for more than one choreographer.
I think, at least I'm thinking about like, quote unquote, Western dance or dance in New York. Like there was a lot of, like you really did work under somebody or with somebody in a particular style or technique or type of choreography for long periods of times, whether that was 10, 15, 20, even 30 years, right?
Wow, yeah.
And what was going on, I feel like it was really going on in the 80s, 90s, was a shift in that, was kind of multiculturalism, but there was also economic shifts that were going on. Besides global economics, there was also economics of maintaining a group of individuals for a livelihood for that length of time was even less sustainable and less moral than it might have been in earlier parts of the 20th century. Definitely for the last 20 years, it's been such a plethora of individuals making work, but also the range of work or how people are trying to fold into their work. And then I feel like the internet has just like exponentially exploded that to the point of it almost becoming, I don't want to say meaningless. It makes it that much more difficult to kind of pinpoint and hold something for longer than a millisecond. So that one can have some type of virtuosity, even if the virtuosity is not in being virtuosic.
Well, when you talk about that control of articulation, when there's so much information on the internet, and especially as far as movement references, it does require more effort, I think, to really focus.
And then it becomes impossible because it's to some degree, depending, it can trigger, and to me, it can be wonderfully inspirational. But the amount of knowledge gathering that has to go in to find out, what is that thing? Is that a thing? Did that just happen on that one meme or reel?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there a whole part of the globe or a community or a village or a nightclub or something that they've been doing that for like 20 years, 100 years, 5,000 years, and you find out, oh, just to make that finger do that, or just to make that elbow or those shoulders do, and that's exciting, but it also points to, well, who's accountable, who's taking responsibility for being accountable to asking the question, and asking the questions that you don't even know that you're not asking.
Given the longevity and ebbs and flows in your own choreographic trajectory, what is the best piece of advice that you've received and might be willing to pass on to someone who is seeking a life in creativity? Or if you'd like to make up your own piece of advice for someone who thinks they want to be an artist.
The first thing that jumped into my brain is I heard from 2, possibly 3 directors, choreographers, and the advice was, hold on to your checkbook.
Okay.
Do not let go of your checkbook.
Wow.
Those came at some earlier times, but it was really, sometimes it's a little bit more metaphorical now, since the idea of an actual checkbook is less and less for some of us of an experience. But just really keeping your eye on the economic responsibility that you have as a company director or choreographer or a project coordinator, maker. It also means that, that the responsibility effectively is yours, and to find the people that can help support you with that and folks that you can trust. But it also means that there needs to be enough checks and balances, no pun intended. There needs to be multiple levels of covering your backside to be responsible to the folks you're working with, as well as protecting your future and your legal or non-legal status and or ability to kind of like continue finding out. Like, as much as I'd love to not think of what I do as a business, it keeps knocking at the door to have to mind that. And you need to have oversight, and because there's so many turns, and there's I don't like saying it's a culture of poverty or some of the other things we will call it in the dance world, but I think it's an expensive field. It takes a lot to cover what the types of support that we need to get to the places that we'd like to get to, in the ways in which we'd like to get there.
Well, what I appreciated about what you offered in that too is not just to get the thing done, but it also is because of the relationships with the people that you're trying to bring along with you to do this work too.
Or the people that you want to be able to have clear severances with. You want to be able to pay them and be done.
There
Don't
you
have
go.
them still like, well, so and so never paid me.
Right.
They promised me.
That's the sort of social responsibility, and contract. Absolutely.
Yeah. It is definitely about relationships and navigating those relationships. And all of those relationships have financial responsibilities, and being able to articulate those clearly.
Mm-hmm.
So folks that are collaborating and working with you have options.
Inside the Dancer's Studio Conversation Series is produced by NCCAkron and supported in part by the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts, and Audio-Technica, a global audio manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Northeast Ohio. Our podcast program is produced by Lisa Niedermeyer of Handmade Future Studio. Rahsaan Cruz is our audio engineer, with transcription by Arushi Singh, theme music by Flaco Torres, and cover art by Micah Kraus. Special thanks to Laura Alicott, Sarah Durham, Christy Welter, Nikisha Moore-Dunson, and Dante Fields. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancer Studio. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.